Just making sure it works. It's too hard.
I think that's part of it. It's on here.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how to do that.
It's not that annoying.
Yeah,
It'll be
we'll just,
fine.
it should settle down as we start going.
Cool. I guess we can pound it. Okay. All right, we'll make a start. Can everyone hear me all right? Hope so. Awesome. Okay, so welcome everyone to New Zealand Coastal Society's first Next Wave Coastal Series Careers Seminar. So my name is Megan and I'm joined by Holly, who's online looking after our online guests. And we together lead the Emerging Professionals portfolio. This seminar series is all about you as emerging professionals, getting the chance to hear from coastal practitioners or experienced coastal practitioners to learn what kind of roles their roles involve, the paths they've taken to get there, and any kind of tips and tricks they've learned or picked up along the way. This is the kind of event that Holly and I both would have loved when we were kind of, coming out of university and trying to work out how to change or turn our degrees into meaningful careers. So hopefully this is all very useful for all of you. Tonight we have 4 fantastic speakers who've all have generously offered up their time and expertise to share their thoughts and kind of, I guess, opinions on their career paths and their journey. So a huge thank you to all of you. I'd also like to extend a thank you to TNT for offering up their space to be our venue. I also wanted to take an opportunity just to plug the Emerging Professionals membership at NZCS. So you'll all be aware that students get free membership, but this is a new membership that we've come up with, which gives you, as emerging career professionals, the first 5 years you can enter this this new membership, and it gives you all these benefits, which you can see on the left. And for the first 3 years, you get 50% off the membership price. So if you haven't signed up, if you aren't a member, or if you haven't contacted us to change your membership into the Emerging Careers portfolio, then just let us know and get in touch and we can do that for you. Please feel free to help yourself to food and drinks. You already have, but you can do that throughout the event. We're not kind of waiting till the end. So kind of just pop up in between in breaks and go and grab yourself a refill if you need. What else I need to say is that we are planning to record this. So just so you're all aware, we've kind of already spoken to the speakers and they're fine with that, but just so you're all aware. And to start us off, Eddie from TNT, who's also a speaker, is going to walk us through the health and safety, and then I will come up and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you. So welcome to the TNT office. We're on the 5th floor here. So in case of emergency, we cannot use the lifts. There are 2 options for fire exit stairs. They're both on that side of the building. So just calmly make your way and follow the green exit signs in the unlikely case of an emergency. And the emergency assembly area is on the corner of Pakenham Street and Customs Street West. Yeah, and we should be fine if there is a CRV today. You do need a swipe card to exit the building. So if you need to leave during, just flag someone down that looks like they belong here, and we'll let you out so you shouldn't be trapped. And there'll be people around that can help with that. Oh, yeah, sweet. So text Josh. Curly hair over there. Sweet. Oh, yeah, and bathrooms on the far wall to the left, just past the printer.
Thank you. So our first speaker is Dr. Emma Ryan. Emma is a coastal scientist, lecturer at Auckland University. Within the School of Environment, her research focuses on coastal systems and understanding the impacts of climate change on coastal systems and communities, and the implications of this on coastal management. When she's not looking at coastal systems, she's also pursuing her research interest looking at coral reef island systems as well. So please join me in thanking Emma.
Right. Kia ora tātou. Nice to see so many people here. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Can you hear me okay back there? Okay, cool. Thank you. Megan's done a nice job of introducing me, but what she didn't tell you was my most important role, which is being mum to my two kids, Patrick and Kate. And so that's probably a bigger role than the role that I'm going to talk to you about today, which is me as a lecturer and researcher at the University of Auckland. I was at university for 8.5 years, which I've just realised is quite a long time. I studied at the University of Auckland and did a Bachelor of Science and Honours and a Master's degree in Geography. And so my background is in coastal geomorphology, and I dug into the picture archives and found this photo of me with a total station in third year capstone course in geography, and I think that's when I really started to become interested in coastal systems. I was lucky enough to work on that project with Haruki Ogawa, and lots of fun stories trying to reconstruct the history of the Ohiwa sandspit. So that's where I really started to become interested and went on to do a postgraduate degree. The photo with lots of people in it is from a postgraduate field trip where I conducted my honours, collected data for my honours research about swash. And I have no idea what I did or what I studied for my honours, but I was on swash, and that's about all I can tell you about that. But then I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to travel to Tuvalu in the Pacific and do field work there for my master's research. And at the time, I didn't really understand the significance of that or the how lucky I was. I just, yeah, that's really set the path for my career, I think. And so on Tuvalu, I was working on a little reef island, looking at how the morphodynamics and hydrodynamics changed over a 2-week period with Paul Kench. And then I said, I'm never doing any research or any sort of science ever again because I was so exhausted from that. But so I was working in a coffee shop, Jones the Grocer. It was down here somewhere, actually. And I applied for, I don't know how many jobs, 25, 30 jobs in Auckland and in Australia related to my degree. And I didn't really want any of those jobs. None of them interested me. I got an interview for one of them, which was at Auckland Council. Sorry, Auckland Council folk, but I didn't want that job. I got the interview, but I didn't want to work there. But and so I just kept working in this coffee shop for about 8 months full time. No idea what I was going to do, but I knew I was sick of cleaning toilets at the end of the day. And then I went to, I got a phone call from my master's supervisor saying he knew someone in Australia who was looking for someone to do a PhD, and I didn't really understand what a PhD was at that time. But I said, that sounds cool. It's near the Great Barrier Reef, and it sounds really interesting. Sure, I'll move to Australia and do a PhD. And again, at that time, I didn't really understand how lucky I was to be offered a scholarship to do a PhD in Australia at James Cook University. So yeah, for me, that pathway was pretty much luck and just following what I was interested in. I had no clear plan for a job, but I knew that I enjoyed what I was studying and doing. So I just kept on doing that because it was making me happy. So in Australia, I completed my PhD. I was supervised by Scott Smithers and Stephen Lewis. And I looked at reconstructing the Holocene evolution of 4 different reefs on the Great Barrier Reef. And most of these were muddy, turbid reefs, so not kind of what you think of when you look at the Great Barrier Reef. But that photo up there of the intertidal coral reef flat is an amazing site called Middle Island. So this is at spring low tide, which is the only time we could do the field work. But you can see a metal pole. This is a core. It's called a percussion core. And I spent a lot of time hammering these percussion cores with a sledgehammer into the reef structure. And then it captures the paleoecology and all the sediments and all the records of how that reef developed through time. And that's my supervisors trying really hard as the tide was coming in rapidly and the sun was setting rapidly to get these two cores out of the ground because they were stuck. And there's also lots of crocodiles in this part of North Queensland. And we were very close to river mouths, and it was like, I probably wouldn't go back and do that research again, thinking about it now, but it was very fun at the time. And I just wanted to talk about learning new things and failing in that context, because I had, it says I've been talking for 43 minutes, but please just stop me if I go too long. Learning new things. So I had no idea what a core was or what anything to do with coral reefs when I started my PhD. And that's okay. So that's what I wanted to highlight, is that you might be trying to start a new job or thinking about doing some study, and you or thinking about your research project that's coming up for your master's or something like that, and you think, oh, I can't do that. I've got no experience in that, no knowledge about that, but that's okay. That's what new things are for, so you can learn those new things. And failing, so this is one of the cores, and I had to try and get down to species level on all of these paleo bits of coral. So this is a bit of coral in the muddy core, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but slowly over time I built up the knowledge to do it. And this is failing. So we thought we'd park the boat spot, and at 5 p.m. at night it would be in water, but it wasn't, and so we had to wait there quite a long time for the tide to come in. There's more to that story, but I don't have time to talk about it. Happy to talk about it later. So then after my PhD, I moved back to Auckland because I wanted to be closer to my family. I love living in Australia, but wanted to be home here. So I moved back and didn't know what to do, but I got in touch with my master's supervisor at Paul Kench, who was at Auckland University at the time, and said, do you have any work, anything? I'll do anything. I'll sieve sediment in a lab. And that's what I did. He said, yeah, I'll hire you for a month to do some sieving of sediment. And I said, okay, cool. So I did that. And then that led to a postdoctoral research position through a grant from the National Science Challenge, Resilience to Nature's Challenges. And through that project, I got about 6 years of postdoc contracts, fixed-term contracts, just being renewed and renewed. So that was really lucky to be part of that program, and that really helped shape my career as well. I also, at the university, did a bunch of teaching contracts, so to help with teaching in the department in different places. But again, many fixed-term contracts, not knowing what I'd be teaching the next year. And that's challenging, but it was lucky for me. It worked out the way it did, because in 2022, a permanent position came up at the university in environment, and this was the second permanent position I'd applied for. I failed on the first round, even though I was already in the department. They didn't want me, so I was like, oh, should I go for the second job? Probably not, but I'll give it a go. And I did, and I got that one, so I thought, oh, that's great. Otherwise, it was going to be a career change at that point. I'd leave the university if they don't want me. But this postdoc time was before I had kids, well, some of it, and that was a really nice chance for me to do some amazing research in some amazing locations. This is me wearing a really cool outfit in the Maldives, trying to hide from the sun, helping a master's student who was looking at a carbonate budget on a coral reef. And this is us in Christmas Island in Kiribati, which is an amazing place. And we're measuring a fossil coral there, which is about 10 meters in diameter. It's about 3,000 years old, that coral. That was really cool. But to get to all of that, I guess it's people that have helped me the most and provided opportunities for me, in particular Paul Kench. So he was really crucial in providing lots of contracts for me, but also opportunities to do field work or attend meetings in Hawke's Bay with other excellent coastal scientists. And I spent the first few years of my postdoc working on the Clifton to Tangoio coastal hazard strategy and contributing to that with this great group of researchers. And so through that, made heaps of networks and got experience in working with different stakeholders and working with consulting firms and people, some of you who are here tonight. And just experience working with communities as well. So I'd never done any of that sort of work before, but really enjoyed it. And then the second part of my postdoc, and also a bit into the permanent job, was through the second round of the Resilience National Science Challenge. So this Science Challenge is a government-funded massive research project, and we were working in the coastal program of that. So I worked with Mark Dixon, Murray Ford, and Megan Tuck here on developing New Zealand's coastal change data set, which some of you might know about. So this was a painful but labour of love project for us, and it took us about 4 years to get to the end, and we employed about 50 research assistants, postgraduate students, and undergraduate students to help with getting it over the line. Happy to talk to you about that later, but that was excellent. And then, so I've been asked to talk a little bit about what my job actually entails now. It's 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. So half my time roughly is supposed to be teaching. That includes supervision of postgraduate students, and 40% research, which is anything from working on projects. I've got 4 ongoing projects at the moment, writing publications and articles and reports. Grant proposals is a big part of it, so applying for money to do more research. We don't just get given money to do research, you have to apply for it and obtain grants. Going on fieldwork, going to conferences, and I'd suggest going to the New Zealand Coastal Society conference. It's a really friendly conference, great if you're kind of starting out and a bit nervous. And then services like admin jobs at the uni, which are necessary but not so fun. So if any of you have studied at Auckland Uni, you might recognise these Canvas pages. These are the courses I teach into at the moment. I'm teaching into 5 this semester, so it's a lot. Some people will only teach 1 course a semester, so it's really mixed bag what teaching you get, and often the newer, younger staff get given a lot more teaching. I also supervise 3 PhD students and 4 master students right now. This is Anna Fleur van Leeuwen. We're on the Kaipara surveying and collecting water samples for her PhD project. And then these are some of my research projects and the people that I'm currently researching with. So it's not my research, it's a collaborative thing. I'm never doing anything on my own. I'm always getting help from technicians at the university or students at the university who are super helpful and do a lot of research and work as research assistants for me. And then a lot of other excellent researchers. At the moment, I just wanted to talk quickly about one project which is ongoing in Tonga, and I've got 2 pictures here looking. This is an orthomosaic reconstruction of a coral reef flat in Tonga, which I'm using photogrammetry methods to reconstruct 3D models of the reef flat. And then if you take those 3D models year after year, you can build up a picture of how that reef is changing and growing through time. In the long run, I want to see if the reefs are growing upwards with sea level rise. And so this is the elevation model. So you can see the corals here are growing faster on the edges. So the red is faster growing than the orange. And I've managed to get this to sub-millimeter accuracy and precision. So it's really kind of precise, fine detail stuff. Oh, this photo is what I think of when I try and balance my personal life with my research, but actually balancing personal life is just challenging enough on its own. This is me earlier this year at the end of my sabbatical trip to the UK and Europe. So I was lucky enough to get some research leave and travel to Europe and the UK, visiting universities, and I took my kids with me and this is the last night of the trip. They were exhausted, and I was trying to eat my pizza. One of my kids is sitting on me. The other one is eating my arm, and I didn't even know he was eating my arm because I was just trying to eat my pizza and drink my Aperol Spritz. But basically, it's a juggle, balancing personal life. And I think in the society we live in particular, it's hard because we have expectations to be really good everywhere. But in Tonga, we took a Tongan person out for dinner who's been helping us, and we asked him, like, how do you balance personal life and work? How much is it, like 80% work, 20% personal? And they were like, no, 50-50. Of course, 50-50. Like, yeah. So I think we've got a lot of work to do here to get to a balance that we'd like. But these are some of the things that allow me to still enjoy my personal life while working as well. And for me, the key things are having a supportive network around me to help with the kids at this point in my life, and then also having flexible working hours. And I've also changed my field sites to be more close to home. So instead of going to exotic, far away locations, I tend to find spots that are closer and easier to get home quickly if I needed to. And if I had any advice to myself when I was younger, these are some of the things I would say. Oh, this is me and my son at Matapori Beach after Cyclone Gabrielle. I just thought that was an interesting photo. This used to be stairs down to the beach, so huge amount of erosion there after Cyclone Gabrielle. Don't do things for free. This is something that I've learned the hard way, is I'll say yes to projects just because they're so interesting, and I've done this very recently and shouldn't have, but I'll just say, yeah, that sounds cool, I'll do that in my spare time, but actually I don't have spare time. And so you be confident to ask for compensation if you're doing extra things beyond your position description, basically. And don't be afraid to say no. Definitely a yes person and have taken on every opportunity that was offered to me, but sometimes feel overwhelmed with the amount of things going on at work. So I'm learning to say no and to file and manage data quicker. Not quicker. I was trying to tell myself to go quick. To file data better. Yeah. Anyway, networking is key, and that's why we're all here tonight. I just wanted to leave you with some photos from fieldwork of some really amazing animals I've seen, and then some strange things in Tonga. These pigs foraging on the intertidal reef plat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Do we have any questions, either in person or online? Holly's gonna. Oh, okay. Okay, Holly, can you take questions online while we've got a hand up? Or we can take questions in the room while we wait. Anybody in here? All right, Holly, we're going to have to work out how to give Andrew a voice. Oh yeah, or can you type, Andrew, if that's possible? I don't know how to.
Hi, Andrew. Sorry, just coming in from online. If you could put questions online into the Q&A bar, I don't seem to be able to unmute participants online, unfortunately.
Cool, we'll wait for Andrew to type that one out.
I can respond later if it's easier.
Depends how fast it's going to be.
John.
Oh.
Could you put that last list of advice to your younger self up?
Oh, sure.
Pretty brilliant. Like, may I take that up?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Really good.
Oh, cool. I was thinking about this at 9 o'clock last night, so I'm glad. My brain was still working.
I think it's key, especially about filing and managing data smartly. How many times you've like come back to something and it's not filed properly, and you're like, yeah. Okay, cool. wait for Andrew's question to come through later, I'll just introduce our next speaker. So Matt is a senior coastal specialist at Auckland Council, working in the coastal management team for about 10-ish years now. He's involved in the delivery of coastal renewal projects and on-the-ground operational responses. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Megan. Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, so Matt's my name. Unlike Emma, I did want to work for the council, although I have some sentiment for Paul Kench back in the day. So my current title is Senior Coastal Specialist in the Coastal Management Team in the Engineering Assets and Technical Advisory Unit of the Resilience and Infrastructure Department at Auckland Council. But yeah, that's quite a mouthful. So I'll take you back to the beginning and sort of step you through my career journey and some of the opportunities and experiences I've had along the way. So when I guess when I was younger, I always enjoyed geography. I always enjoyed science, but I've always loved the coast. So after high school, I went and just did a Bachelor of Science at Auckland University. And then I did the standard Kiwi thing and went overseas for some time and did some traveling, hell of a lot of surfing. And about 18 months or maybe 2 years into that process, I get a little bit old and I thought at some point I'm probably going to have to get a real job. Kind of terrified me. So, well, you know, I love the coast. How can I? And it sort of felt at the time like that might be a really difficult field to get into, quite a narrow field. Thought, oh, well, you know, I'll go back and I'll do a master's degree, have a go to master's and see where that takes me. So I did, a Master's of Science at Auckland, did a coastal thesis, sediment dynamics at Little Shoal Bay, looked at coastal processes there, sediment movement, looked at options for future management, something some people in this crowd are still grappling with, including our team. I got a small grant from North Shore City, the previous North Shore City Council, from the Birkenhead Community Board it was at the time. And I managed to get a part-time job at that council while I was doing my thesis, which was really useful for just gaining some experience, some real life experience as to how councils work. That was in the environmental strategy and policy team. And I did a range of little projects in that team, which was really good little stepping stone for, hey, this is what working council might look like. And I actually worked there for another 6 or so months after I graduated, which was awesome. And then I managed to get a job in Whangarei at the Northland Regional Council, a narrow sort of job as a coastal consents officer. But again, that was an awesome stepping stone in terms of just getting that experience in terms of processing consents, knowledge of the RMA, policy direction. And working for a small council, I found you got some sort of really good hands-on experience. So the first week I remember attending an environment court hearing. I remember we declined a resource consent, which is pretty rare, doing environment court mediation following that. So that was a pretty cool little 12, 18-month experience. There's a slide I've left out post this one where I did 6, maybe 8 weeks at a land development company. Not for me. And then I joined what also doesn't exist anymore, was the Auckland Regional Council. As a position there came up in the coastal management team, which was kind of at the time where I always wanted to end up at. There's also, how many people in this room? There's 2 or 3 of us from that team in this room at the moment, and a few of us actually at Auckland Council still from this very team. This was pretty cool because we did a range of things in this team. We wasn't as siloed as that previous job. We did a lot of coastal consents and regulatory compliance stuff, got involved in coastal policy work. We did coast care stuff like dune planting, worked with community groups on that type of thing. And then coastal monitoring, I got involved in some of the beach profile monitoring program at that time, got it to go out in the field quite a bit to help with that stuff. And we had a lot of other environmental focused teams in that department at the time. So we got to work pretty closely with a range of other teams, like stormwater, earthworks people, natural heritage, etc. We did a lot with the harbour master at the time as well, which was awesome because they had boats and it was always fun being on the water. Some examples of interesting stuff I got involved in at the ARC. I did quite a bit of compliancy stuff to do with unlawful vessels and moorings, again alongside the harbour master. that top left was, that top left example went through the Environment Court. There's actually some case law around that specific vessel, which I definitely won't go into. Bottom right, that's some early beach profile monitoring at Muriwai before we realigned the car park. That's, if you know Muriwai, that's where the car park is pre-realignment, when we were going through a really rapid phase of erosion there. So that was actually a really fascinating period to be involved in that project and the monitoring of that. You can, look at the technique we've got going here. It's old school. Got to see some really cool projects delivered even in that time. Example of some of the beach replenishments down in the city here, Kaimanawa and St Heliers. Really fascinating. Again, Joe's in the room. Someone else here, still in our team, was heavily involved in that as well. If you know those projects, it's St Heliers, where top left you can see where they were pumping a slurry of sand ashore directly from offshore Pakari, for better or worse, building near of those headland control structures and installation of the stormwater network underneath. So really big, interesting coastal projects when I was still quite young to my career to get exposed to. Was really interesting at the time, and taught me a lot, I guess. Another interesting one at the time for me was I was quite heavily involved in the Pakari sand extraction monitoring of those resource consents. That was really topical at the time in the media, and there was a lot of public interest. There still is, I guess, has been in recent times, and we had a chairman of the regional council at the time that was very anti this. So we actually used to go out and with the harbour master and do the odd spot check to make sure they were in the right location. I got to look at the monitoring. They had a pretty strict monitoring set of conditions on their consent. So I got to review that in terms of their beach profile, bathymetric monitoring, and interpretation of what was happening on the beach at Pakari and Te Arai, considering weather patterns, El Nino, La Nina, etc. So again, that was pretty cool from a sciencey perspective. I've always slightly preferred the science side of things in my younger days. And then in 2010, we had the formation of the mighty Auckland Council. And so at that point, what was the Auckland Regional Council was disestablished along with the city and district councils at the time. So I'm someone that hates sitting at a desk 40 hours a week. Something that's horrible. I can do it for most of the week, but definitely not all the week. But this was one opportunity that came up, which was worth parking my bum on a seat for 40 hours a week, where I joined the coastal policy team. And the task they had at hand was, at the time, we had what was called the Regional Coastal Plan. So that was the rule book that contained the objectives, policies, and rules for works and activities in the coastal marine area for the whole of the Auckland region. And we had to review all those to input into the development of the Auckland Unity Plan, which was the big rule book for the Auckland region. So it was actually a really fascinating couple of years. Those topics down below were the ones that I was most heavily involved with. Again, moorings, and then coastal structures in general, and marinas, and my favourite topic, surf breaks, which to me was also one of the most favourite things I've done in my career, given I've got a small passion for surfing. We did things. I remember we ran a survey to help inform the development of regionally significant surf breaks, and I remember we put this out to the surfing community and got 1,500 plus responses. And I remember at the time the marketing team going, "Oh my God, how did you get so many responses? We can't get those for important things like roads." And they were blown away at the interest because, surfers are a bunch of opinionated non-experts generally. But that was, really cool. So as a result of that, we developed, 33 regionally significant surf breaks that are recognised in the Unity Plan and have policies around them in terms of mitigating effects on those as a result of various developments, which, Pakari sand extraction, again, back to that consents that have come up, that was something they had to consider. It wasn't optional in terms of potential effects on the surf break at Te Arai and Pakari. So, that was definitely a pet project of mine. It was very, very enjoyable. I did all the site visits in the weekends, so I didn't get paid for those. And then from there, I jumped to, had enough time doing policy sitting around at a desk all week. I jumped into a bit of a narrow role again, but it was a specialist team in another unit, the Natural Resources Specialist Input Unit. And there we were providing, I guess, an upper level assessment of coastal permit applications. On balance, I guess, more technically difficult ones. It was quite good because you didn't have to do the full processing of those resource consents. You could sort of pick apart the coastal elements of those and ask difficult questions. And we got a little bit involved in coastal compliance, but not as much. So it was certainly interesting, and we got some interesting complex applications like when Ngāmatētia Marina came up, things like that, or the Penlink Bridge proposal. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. It's a couple of years, but I kind of had enough of that at the end of that time. But the team at that time I always wanted to join was then called the Resilient Land and Coasts Unit, now the Engineering Assets and Technical Advisory Coastal Management Team, who fantastic Natasha Carpenter's out there somewhere, who's our practice lead. So we got this is probably the most technically skilled, I think, team that I've worked in. We're a mix of coastal engineers, coastal scientists, and we have coastal project managers. So we're a bunch of subject matter experts. So we deliver coastal renewal, physical coastal renewal projects. I get heavily involved in operational response on the ground. That might be in response to storm events or structures that deteriorate or break at short notice, requiring, rapid response or advice, or moving sand around on beaches following storms, or as an response to erosion or whatever's triggered that change. I get involved in, which I've always loved too, is the coastal monitoring program alongside Megan here with, in terms of the beach profile monitoring, again, a bit more advanced than the early days I was involved in that. And in the deployment of the instruments we've got out there, like the wave buoys and cameras and stuff. And I find that really fascinating too, and interpretation of that data and looking at those changes. And having the instruments we've got out there now is so far beyond what we had 10, 15 years ago. It just gets more and more interesting in terms of gathering and interpreting that data. So that's very cool. And then we get quite involved in storm response. Another thing I love weather. I love lots of weather. So I'm pretty good at interpreting weather maps and forecasts. So again, to me, that's not a job. I love that my day job and my personal life involves checking the weather and the tides constantly. And one thing when I got that job at the ARC, I'll never forget a quote that Andrew Benson at the time, who employed me, said to me. I'll never forget. He said, "At the end of the day, you get paid to go to the beach," and that's always kind of stuck with me. So in this current team, yeah, we get to do some pretty cool hands-on projects in terms of the delivery of coastal renewals. So I've just put up a couple of slides of recent projects. We get to play with diggers and rocks. We get to get involved in the design of options from up front. We get to get involved on the ground with directing contractors. So it can be really hands-on and adapting it. So this has been, I guess my training hasn't involved formally coastal engineering, but being in this team, I've really learned a lot, and sitting alongside some really skilled coastal engineers, I've really been able to upskill on the job in terms of coastal engineering. And I'm a lot more confident in that now than I was a few years ago in that regard. Before it was more sort of desktop, looking at applications, looking at plans, but being involved in the field with delivery of these projects is, you learn so much in that way. Another little one, so just see another recent coastal project we delivered. We have some really interesting sites, I guess. You can see this one, it was water access only. This is emergency works response too. So we get involved in some rapid responses as well. We get some opportunities occasionally to trial, to be brave and trial some. This is more of a softer solution response, where as opposed to just chucking rocks back, we've tried and we've done it at Stanmore Bay too. Soft solution approach, i.e. we've realigned that coastline, planted it out, done what all the policy direction directs us to consider. Yes, and it has required being brave, but we've pulled a couple of these off in recent times, which is quite satisfying. So if you're at Browns Bay or the eastern end of Stanmore Bay, go and have a look at the dunes there, and think if you prefer the look of that as opposed to big rock hammering on your beach. Yeah, and we've had obviously it's a really active, certainly 21 to 23, and then even the last 5-6 weeks we've had a huge amount of storms. So it's really cool to be, go out, look at these forecasts, go out on the ground, see what's happening, and then even with your monitoring afterwards to document what's happened, look what's damaged, and then to work with the asset owners, so the parks people, in terms of response to the result of these storm events. And that's going to give us lots of work going forward as well. And then, yes, an example of some of the operational stuff. This is moving sand on a beach at Orewa. Again, that's a lot of fun. I guess with this job comes a lot of PR too, in terms of community's opinion about expenditure of ratepayers' money, which is another element of working for council, is dealing with their community and politicians. Not always the most fun, but a big part of it, and you get better and your skin gets thicker. And then I was just going to touch on at the end, why still Auckland, the Auckland region? One thing working for council, obviously I don't get to go to the Maldives. I do that in my spare time. I have to stay in Auckland. But in my opinion, it's a pretty cool coastline with a lot of variability. That's it there in colour and on the right. And yeah, from working on the open high energy black sand West Coast beaches to those open East Coast beaches, offshore islands, we had projects at Waiheke and Great Barrier. We've got downtown with the port here. We've got East Coast Bays beaches, which are urban beaches that do receive waves and storms, and a lot of structures on those. So yeah, it's actually, to me, it's a really fascinating coastline to be working with, and still doesn't bore me, and there's still nooks and crannies that you don't always know that well. But then when you do get to know the whole 3,200 kilometres of coastline, it's also pretty cool to be able to watch it change over time, either for development or nature. Yeah, that's me.
Matt, I draw on Matt's expertise all the time at the council, so yes, he's very knowledgeable about the coast here. Okay, are there this time, if anyone asks any questions, could you mind typing them out? I think Holly does have one online if she pops on.
Yes, so we've got the question from Andrew that's come through now, so maybe we pose it to both Emma and Matt. The question is, how would you suggest getting into a new area and making connections quickly? I have recently moved and I want to know other engineers.
For me, definitely as a student, was having an opportunity to work at a council anyway, even if it's not paid work, just to get in a building with people.
Yeah, I agree. I volunteered for Auckland Council at one point, doing some marine ecology stuff. It was really cool. And yeah, nothing against Auckland Council. My husband works at Auckland Council. Networking, yeah, I don't know. Just find any event, any events you can go to, or email people. And don't use ChatGPT for your cover letters or your emails, or be unique. Be yourself.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, either online or in person?
That is all the online questions we have at this stage.
We do have one in person. I might have to give you this.
Yeah, I guess just how do you kind of reckon with like your passions of surfing and maybe having to monitor things that might be detrimental to that passion and similar metaphors in your career?
Yeah, I guess a lot of my spare time, I'm always often at the beach, and I can't help look at things. Often, I guess that, the policy direction, what we're trying to deliver, is protecting and is supportive of the natural environment and its processes. So yeah, I don't feel that. There's always, like, if you're building a seawall on a particular beach, say Orewa, that might have some wave reflection. Yeah, it has crossed my mind. But generally, I think the stuff we deliver is typically on more urban non-surf beaches. If someone proposed a ferry terminal eventually at Takapuna Bay off the reclamation of the Linnean, there's going to be wave reflection. I wouldn't want to be involved in that even remotely. So, but it hasn't got to that point. At that point, I'd point to the policies I developed around surf breaks. So I haven't, I guess, been put in that position where my passion's been compromised by work-related. It's almost the reverse. Yeah, but yeah, it's always something to be aware of.
Thank you. Any other questions? Or we will move to the next speaker. Thank you. So our next speaker is Jennifer Hart. She's a senior technical director at Beca, specializing in port and coastal engineering. She started as a civil engineer and is here to tell us how she got to where she is today. Thank you very much.
Hey, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I'm thinking that engineers probably have the easiest road in some ways of all of the disciplines represented. Because once you're an engineer, you know you're heading for engineering as your career. You've already taken that first step in your decision making. So my career path has been fairly sequential. Do an engineering degree, get an engineering job, do a bit more of an engineering degree, do a bit more of an engineering job, and just keep going. Where it's been interesting, I guess, is the ability to move around the world and work on different projects. And also what I've found really fascinating is how you accumulate knowledge. Engineering and coastal science and coastal planning all seems to me to be a very heavily intellectual, knowledge-based industry. And it just takes time to accumulate that knowledge and that sense of judgment. So I think we probably beat ourselves up a little bit sometimes, expecting that we'll know things earlier than we possibly can. We need the experience to get to that point of feeling really comfortable in this space. So that was a quick overview of my career path, but I'm just going to step through the different phases and decisions I made along the way. And so the first one really is why on earth port and coastal engineering? And it goes back to, there's a black and white photo there, which is a little bit scary. But this decision is one that started when I was really young, and our family lived up near Whangateao, which is on the east coast in what was Rodney District in the Auckland region. And while we were living there, Omaha Sandspit had just been developed as a subdivision on the beach. And we had a big series of storms come through in the 1970s. And the black and white photo you can see there is what happened in front of this brand new palatial well, it was palatial for the time, subdivision. There was a timber seawall that was put in to protect the land, and the beach in front of it continued to erode. And eventually in 1978, a huge storm sat off our northeastern coastline and hammered all of those east coast beaches. And it took out this, it must have been a 2 or 3 metre high timber seawall that ran for hundreds of metres. And there were properties in behind it that were surrounded by water. And I can remember the local trucking contractor dumping rock on the beach, emergency riprap. So that was a really formative memory of the power of the sea and how interesting it was that people could really stuff things up badly. Interesting too, when you look at Omaha today, I don't know how many people realise that it's actually an engineered beach, what we see there. That 1978 storm, because people had mucked around with the morphodynamics of the beach and the sediment processes, that 1978 storm took out the whole north end of the beach and opened up Whangateao Harbour to a much more severe wave intrusion. And it wasn't going to come back. People had to go in there and fix it. We had to engineer a solution. So the spine of Omaha Beach is all built out of rock. And there's actually a last line of defence that runs along Omaha, buried beneath the dunes in front of the original subdivision, that if we ever get that sort of erosion again, that underlying rock revetment will be exposed and will protect the houses in behind. When you walk down on the beach today, you don't see any of that. You get the impression of a beautiful natural landscape with dune grasses and this healthy reservoir of sand on the beach. But we've had to put it back together after people mucked it up. So I think that was one thing that really stuck in my mind, is the power of the sea and the ability of people to make a mess, but also the ability of people to clean it up again. The other thing I really loved was marine biology. Roger Grace was a friend of the family. The Goat Island Marine Reserve had only recently been set up when we were living up at Whangateao, and we could see the power of having a reserve and the recovery of the ecology. You could see it happening in front of you on a month-by-month basis almost, as people stopped harvesting the kaimoana in that area. And you look there today and it probably would be healthier if it was a little larger, but it is an amazing place. And so for me, there was this decision between the marine biology or the port and coastal engineering. And port and coastal engineering honestly, it sounded a bit harder and a bit more unusual and challenging. And so I plumped for that. But to get there, I had to go quite a long route. We don't have coastal engineering courses in New Zealand. So I went to Canterbury University and I did the next best thing, which was a civil engineering degree. And I was really fortunate. In my last year of that degree, there was a visiting lecturer from Hawaii who gave a special paper on coastal engineering. So that's Bob Grace there. I took his paper and I loved it. There was some very, very high-powered mathematics in it, which I still don't really get to grips with properly. But that was really the first piece that actually opened the door to that career after I'd made that decision that that's where I'd like to head. And there were lots of other really good opportunities I found at university as well. So there was NSOC, the Engineering Society, and that was great for making contacts with people in other disciplines. And the Women in Engineering group was set up as I was there as well. And that was another really good way of meeting a bunch of people outside your own class and making those initial contacts and starting to talk through some of those career decisions and what you might do after your bachelor's degree. Sadly, the world went into the 1987 crash as I was ending my degree, and there weren't a lot of engineering jobs out there. So I finished a couple of years after the crash, and it was really tough to find a job. And so I took the decision to stay at uni and to do a master's degree. And I swapped from Canterbury up to Auckland. It was a little bit cheaper to be living at home for a while, and the beaches were beautiful up there as well. And so I studied a master's by thesis with Colin Christian at Auckland University. And that actually took me as long to do as my bachelor's degree. So I was probably not as focused as I should have been. But it was a really good process to have that independent research. You had to power yourself and you had to think your way through the topic. So Colin was great, but that sort of master's by thesis is quite tough going. I don't know how people manage to do PhDs. I am in awe of that. I did take a couple of papers though, and Kevin Parnell, who I think some people here tonight know, was one of the people who I bumped into at university, and his coastal geomorphology paper was brilliant. And he took us on extended site visits and field trips, and we learned a lot from that, very practical hands-on knowledge about what was happening on our coastlines in the region. I did jump into industry for a bit, but while I'm on the study slide, the other piece of study I did was after a few years working, where I found out about a fellowship that offered $30,000 a year for New Zealand civil engineers to study overseas. And I applied, and fortunately not many other people applied, and so I ended up with the fellowship. And that took me across to Delft. You could use it wherever you liked. I decided to go to Delft, and there was an English, a school that taught in English, but using the Dutch lecturers from TU Delft. So IHE Delft was this international school. They pulled people in from all around the world, some people like me who were self-funded, but the very clever Dutch also offered scholarships to people from developing countries. Because of course, once you've got people in your country, you can introduce them to Delft Hydraulics and Delft Geotechnics and Haskoning, and they become aware that there's a great resource there that they can call on when they're later on in their careers. So I found it fascinating to see the Dutch systems in action and to understand that very strategic thinking. And I also was so fortunate to be lectured by some of the really top minds in coastal engineering. So Henk-Jan Verhagen was our course leader, and he would bring in researchers from the Port of Rotterdam. We worked with Jensje van der Meer. He came in and gave lectures. So all the names that were associated with formulae in coastal engineering seemed to pass through those doors. It was only a 1-year course, but it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity. And I think for us in New Zealand, where we don't have quite so many opportunities to go into that international network, to be able to take a fellowship and go overseas for a year or 2 years and study is something I would highly recommend. And those links really come in useful further down the track. Just in the last few years, we've been working with the NCA again. So, and that was pulling on that relationship from quite some time ago to bring him into a project where we really needed his experience and research base. So study was important, but industry was important too. So in between, it does sound as though I did a lot of degrees, and it was really only a bachelor's and 2 masters, and they were all slightly different. But in between the first masters and the second masters, I worked in New Zealand, and my first job was with what was called Works Consultancy. It became Opus, and then it became WSP. But I joined it just as it was moving out of being the Ministry of Works, and it had just been set up as its own limited liability company, Works Consultancy. So that was quite an unusual environment. It was fascinating, though, because I was working with big infrastructure, which I'd never expected to be. So my very first job was actually inspecting roads around West Auckland. And that was a part-time job while I finished off my Auckland master's degree. So very grateful to Works Consultancy for helping fund that last bit of my degree. I think we do it in an automated way now. We don't have RAM inspectors going out in cars and walking the roads on foot. It is a far more intelligent way of doing that work, but it certainly paid the bills for a poor student. The other thing is that it never looked like an exciting job, but that part-time, very mundane role with Works Consultancy led to a job working on the Auckland Harbour Bridge, which really for a graduate engineer has got to be the world's best job. Anytime that the office got a little bit boring, there was the opportunity to go out onto the Harbour Bridge and make sure that the paint thicknesses on the overarch were sufficient and check how the crevice corrosion remediation was going. So it was a fantastic blend of doing work in the office and dealing with the team there, exposure to the client and working with the client and understanding what was important, and that was back in the day when it was Transit New Zealand, what was important to them, but also being able to get out on site, out onto the infrastructure and understand what was happening there too. We did a number of other things at Works Consultancy, working with the local councils. So I think you'll probably see a number of parallels in the stories tonight. I actually did a lot of the coastal asset inspections when I was with Works Consultancy. And that too was a really great grounding in basic coastal engineering. And so you're walking around looking at old timber jetties and knee-high, as we can see here, knee-high pitched stone revetments and walls. And you're understanding for each of those sites how the natural environment's working with those structures. You're looking at a whole lot of different structures and the durability of those different structures. You're looking at them at different stages in their life cycle. Some will be brand new, some will be 50 years old or 80 years old. It gives you a really good appreciation of some of the most basic parts of coastal engineering. But I did find that I was ending up doing more and more roading work, and I wanted to work in the port and coastal space. So after about 1.5 years at Works Consultancy, I decided I really wanted to join Beca because I knew they had a coastal team. So I tried very hard to get myself in the door, sent heaps of CVs, actually employed a consultant, an employment consultant, to help me get in the door because I was so desperate to get a job in a full-on port and coastal team. Finally managed to get a job offer, and this was, again, we were at a stage where, like today, there weren't a lot of jobs around, so you really had to push hard if you wanted a job. But I joined the team, and it was a fantastic group because we had a number of seniors, and there were 2 or 3 of us who were sort of graduates or graduates plus a couple of years. We did a huge range of projects. So anytime I head up to Matakana, Matakana wharf repairs were one of the first jobs I worked on. So if you look down, mindful of health and safety, if you look down under the wharf, those repairs are still going strong. So the contractor obviously did a fantastic job. And that's none of it was complex, but it was really good experience just to be able to see these jobs through from the start and doing that initial inspection, identifying the defects, working up a tender document that had specifications and the contractual form of how you wanted those works to be delivered, tendering it, and then supervising the works and looking after the contract administration. So those sort of bite-sized jobs were great for experience. We also had some huge jobs like the Clifford Bay Ferry Terminal study that again was another job I worked on early in my time at Beca. And that was really a once-in-a-lifetime project in many ways. You don't get to work on greenfields port projects very often in your career, and especially not ones as complex as Clifford Bay with all the sediment processes. It's very exposed, very windy. It's got seismicity going on. You have to open up quarries. So although it never got built, it was a fascinating project to have worked on. And then there was the odd trip up to the islands as well, Port of Lautoka. So I went away, did my degree in Delft, came back and worked for Beca for a bit longer. And that was great. And I did a number of projects in Beca, as we've talked about. As I kept on working on jobs, I was finding that I was doing more and more port work. So some of those projects were amazing. Worked on the first round of the Rangitoto Channel dredging, and that was a fascinating project, a great client, very, very thoughtful client, and very conscious of wanting to do the right thing. And that process I really enjoyed. But we were still doing a lot of wharf repairs, and I was really keen to try and do some genuine coastal engineering, and there wasn't a lot of it around in New Zealand at that stage. So I headed off to the UK and was lucky enough to find a job with Halcro, who at that stage were one of the bigger UK consultants. They had a ports team and a separate coastal team, and I joined the coastal team and spent the next 4 years working on sea defences projects. It was really interesting. The amount of money the UK had for sea defences compared with what we were used to doing in New Zealand was chalk and cheese. And there were decades of research that had been done to inform the practices. So things that we'd only really just started doing in New Zealand to assess roading projects, the sea defences projects in the UK were already well at that level of maturity and beyond. So looking at 50-year strategies, at benefit cost ratios for a number of different options within those strategies, including climate change in them. So this to me, coming from New Zealand, where we were barely even thinking about climate change and including it in our designs, was really fascinating. And for me, just the jump from New Zealand to the UK was interesting in terms of the resources they had to draw on. The consultancy practice, I actually found our New Zealand consultancies were amazing, very much more client focused and very much more careful about the quality of our deliverables and checking our work and verification and sticking to budgets. The UK was much more relaxed. I think the consultancies were a lot larger, and I think several of them had a really good pipeline of revenue from the Middle East. So the consultancy practice wasn't such a strength, but my goodness, the amount of information that you had to draw on and the systems and processes that had been set up around some of these technical challenges were fantastic. So 2 of the projects I worked on there for 4 years one was the Haysborough-Winterton scheme, which is the top left there. And before I joined Halcro, a number of detached breakwaters had been built. When I joined, what was happening was that there was a periodic sand renourishment process that happened. So sand would be dredged by the Dutch dredging companies from the North Sea and placed on the English beaches, and the English taxpayers would pay for this. And then the sand would wash back into the North Sea, and the dredging companies would come along a couple of years later and do the same thing again. So it was, I guess you could say it was working with nature in that way. And obviously, the dredging company's making very good money out of it. But it was also interesting to see how these schemes were justified. And so in terms of the coastal erosion versus coastal flooding hazards here, what drove a lot of these very big, expensive schemes was the fact that you had really low-lying land behind them. And I think this was my first appreciation of the issues that we might start to face in New Zealand. We don't have a huge pool of money. We don't have this amazing research base and all these systems and processes. But the same issues that the East of England were facing were going to come for us as well. And so one thing I was very conscious of as I came back to New Zealand was trying to bring those learnings with us. We can't afford to get into some of the difficulties that the UK has because we don't have the money to pull ourselves out of those problems. Where the UK, I think even now they struggle to afford it actually, but where the UK was spending millions of dollars putting sand on beaches, we would never be able to afford to do that, to get ourselves out of trouble. You can see on the bottom right-hand corner, that is Van Ord doing exactly this sort of sand nourishment. And that's on the Lincolnshire scheme, which was another one I worked on. And there were a couple of small projects down on the Lizard, which is a peninsula in Cornwall. So similar to New Zealand in some ways, it's a legacy structure, an old reinforced concrete structure, and serious wave attack, and working through the different options. It's dearly loved by the community, but trying to find a middle ground that isn't too expensive, keeps the structure for community use, but also tries not to tie in the funding body, which was the National Trust, to 50 years worth of expensive upkeep. So after some time in the UK and learning some great lessons, I came back to New Zealand and back into probably more of a mixture of projects where it had been, I think in the UK, it's such a large market, you can specialise. In New Zealand, certainly the diversity in consultancy is a big deal. So it was working on projects from Tuvalu comes up yet again. This is probably the only place in Auckland tonight where Tuvalu is going to be mentioned at least 3 times, I suspect, in the presentations. So working on the Ship to Shore project up in Tuvalu, which is fascinating because you really do need to be very conscious of trying not to bring all the things we take for granted into a country where access is so difficult. Finding solutions for getting people off the big inter-island ferries, well, relatively large inter-island ferries, and onto the shore really needs careful thought. Working on Wynyard Quarter, so that was a project that was just starting to kick off as I came back to Auckland, and 15 years later, we can see the realisation of what was only sketched on paper when I was first working on it. So that was the development of this whole precinct of Wynyard Quarter with the wharves, Karinga Plaza, Silo Park, and now the park at the north end of Wynyard Point itself. So probably more of a land development project, but importantly with big coastal aspects to it. A reasonable amount of port work around the country. So that's really interesting. It's nice to have the balance between the port projects and the coastal projects because they're both important to New Zealand. Ports are how we make our living as a country by exporting to markets. And the coasts and beaches are really important to us for our way of life and also for protecting our land. So Port of Marlborough, Ports of Auckland, Port Otago, who have put money into a coastal amenity scheme in the bottom right in the Otago Harbour, the Wild West Coast beaches and the challenges they face. And for all of these projects, what's really interesting is working through that process of understanding what the client wants, what the other stakeholders in that project are after, and trying to work with that and the technical knowledge that we as coastal specialists bring to the projects to find the optimum solution. And sometimes you're lucky enough to go in right at the start and be involved in helping to work through those, identify and work through those different options. Sometimes you're coming in just to do a job, repair a seawall, or to build a tug berth wharf. but the projects I think that are probably most rewarding for consultants are those where you right alongside the client at the very beginning. And Te Raoni was one of those. That's the white sandy beach. Okay, so just moving through if I can. Yep, there we go. So into consultancy today, and what I do in my day job now continues to be a mixture of projects. And I guess over time you suddenly realize that you have steadily, without deliberately planning to, become a bit more senior as part of your team. So where I used to be the one heading out on site and writing condition assessment reports and looking after contract monitoring, I now tend to be the one a little bit more back in the office and involved in scoping the projects and checking the work. But we're such a small industry, and it's very much a skill set where we work together on a number of different size projects. So I do still find I'm doing technical work as well, which I really enjoy, is the variety of it. So some of the live projects we've got on at the moment, we've got the Aramoana Mole. So that's a fascinating structure that's been built, I guess, over something like 100 years, a bit of a legacy structure, and working with the asset owner to try and find out what the best way of keeping that structure going for another 50 years is going to be. Wellington Airport seawall, one of the most exposed seawalls in New Zealand, gets swells coming right up from Antarctica. And so that's been a brilliant opportunity to look at some really interesting solutions for New Zealand. And so one of the things that's happened there is that we're going to be trying a new concrete armour unit. We've used the Dutch X-block units around New Zealand. We've used the Australian handbar units. For this site, we want a unit that we can place really fast and a unit that's really robust. So we're looking at a Spanish Cubipod. And that's been an absolutely brilliant project. So we're working with people across the other side of the world. Jensje Vandermeer is working with us. We've been in there with contractors and planners alongside us right from the get-go. Fantastic client to work with. And that's just getting towards the end of detailed design now. And I should also do a shout out to Tonkin and Taylor, because they've been our peer reviewers. We often peer review each other's work, and TNT have peer reviewed our work on this, which has been wonderful. It's been such a pleasure working with the Tonkin and Taylor team. And likewise, there are other jobs where we do the same for them. So I think the synergies in this industry where we do understand each other's projects and ways of working, it's a real strength for us. You can also see the Kapiti Coast seawalls there, another project that we're working on at the moment. And there are times when we get to step outside the normal consultancy project work and do things that support the broader industry. So a few years back, we worked with Ports of Auckland to host the Pacific Maritime Transport Authority conference here in New Zealand. And that meant we had port engineers from around the Pacific, from Tuvalu, Tonga, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, coming through to New Zealand and sharing knowledge. And we were arranging a few rugby trips, I think, alongside as well. Conferences like the Coasts and Ports Conference that's coming up in about a month's time, the NZCS conference later this year in Napier, are also a really big part of consultancy work for us, getting out there and for us to learn from others and share the little bit of knowledge that we might have got from projects. And it's also important to support those organisations, I think, as well, as part of our industry. So I think that has probably brought me to the end of my presentation. But if there were any questions, I'd be very happy to take those. Oh, excellent. I get off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your coastal journey with us. And we've got one more speaker. Eddie is a senior coastal geomorphologist here at TNT for just over 6 years, and provides his coastal and modelling expertise to clients in New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific, if I'm correct.
One more. So thanks everyone. Aware it's getting a little bit late in the evening, so feel free to get up and grab some more food and some drink and to enjoy the last, hopefully, 15 minutes. I typically tend to know how to do a 5-minute speech or an hour long, so hopefully we can just end up in just about the right place. So a little bit about me, coastal geomorphologist at TNT, and I'll work my way through my career at the moment. This cover shot is a little glimpse of projects I've worked on over the last 10 or so years. You can just squeeze in a few from horizon to horizon based on the curvature of the Earth there. So I studied physical geography and environmental science at university. I guess the reason for going into that field was I grew up as a typical North Shore, Auckland beach kid, out at the beach all the time, surfing every weekend, a little bit like Matt. I was obsessed with the weather, the tide, and understanding how those processes work together to produce those magical days when you're at the beach. There's a nice light offshore wind and beautiful waves that you can ride. So straight after high school, class of 2004, for anyone that's curious, I moved down to Gisborne. So saved up for a few months mowing lawns over summer, and then spent a year basically just trying to find that perfect ride on the East Cape. So I lived on the beach in Wainui, found a flat with a few friends. My first coastal geomorphology mentor was a local surfer called Sean. He was about twice my age, and he was very tapped into understanding how the rhythm of the beach worked in that kind of symphony of waves coming in, the tide moving, sand coming and going. And he would find those magic days better than anyone. So I'd follow him around until we became friends. And then I could tag along and get a few of those rides, or at least try. So my parents took some sense into me after a year, and they dragged me back to Auckland, and I went to university. I feel like if I went straight from high school to university, I probably would have done physics. That was my favorite subject at high school. But I've always been really curious and maybe a little bit obsessed about the natural world, more so the physical natural world than the living biology and cellular stuff, but the weather, and especially at the coast from having that surfing connection. So it was kind of inevitable that I found myself in the geography department and learning a whole range of things about the Earth system, the climate, the weather, and how people interact with the landscape, and how we create problems for ourselves by developing them in the wrong place, on a floodplain of a river or too close to the coastal edge. And as I progressed through undergrad, I just got more and more interested in that coastal dynamics, trying to understand the interaction between waves, tides, and shorelines, and that consistent harmony between the physical landforms and the physical processes. So graduating with a bachelor's in 2008, there was a global financial crisis. No one really wanted to hire geographers. I was a bit of a nerd in my coastal dynamics paper. So the lecturers at the time, Paul Kench, and there's meant to be one behind. There's a photo covering their faces, but Paul Kench and Mark Dixon in the water below that photo. I'll just recover their faces quickly. Oh, now we've killed it. Whoops. Oh, well, anyway, don't worry about that. So they encouraged the whole cohort of us to go through the honours program. So I did that. And in doing so, we spent a lot of time collecting field data, and we're outside in the environment with these really knowledgeable people. So we're walking around on the beach, learning how to collect data, measure beach profiles, measure waves, measure currents, and then tie together that story of the environment to understand how the landscape changes, not just on that day-to-day timescale, but throughout the recent history and throughout the geological past. So through that, I ended up writing my first academic paper as an honours student and going through the process of getting that published. Did an internship at ASR where I got to build an artificial reef and a wave flume, and then being able to kind of take that natural world into the lab and control the boundary conditions and create different shapes on the shoreline, create waves and watch it all come together in that controlled world. I just found it quite remarkable. So I thought, yeah, this is quite cool. Then the slide dynamics don't seem to work, so you don't get to see all the photos, but that's all right, it'll speed me up a little bit. So towards the end of my honours year, there was an opportunity, if I got good enough grades, that I'd get a scholarship to go to the Maldives and collect data on waves and currents around a resort that had some beach management issues. So that encouraged me to get some pretty good grades. I didn't feel like I was fully qualified to study tropical coral reefs until I'd experienced them firsthand. So I took 6 months off and went to Indonesia and just went surfing. And having that, for me, there's only a certain amount that you can learn by reading a textbook and solving equations. But when you're out there trying to duck dive a wave on a shallow reef, you learn pretty quickly what the physical process are trying to tell you. So that's an important process for me to develop an intuition about the environment, where my expertise come in as not just seeing it as a theory, but also a playground. Teaches you pretty quickly. So then I went to the Maldives, deployed a whole bunch of current meters and pressure sensors, ended up doing some work for the government over there as well, trying to understand issues around a reclamation. My master's scholarship was a pretty good gig, really, because I got sent to this. It was a 5-star resort. My project was about collecting data. So once I'd deployed about 10 wave gauges and a bunch of current meters, there was nothing really to do. But my supervisor had said, this equipment's worth quite a lot, so you have to go check it every day. So all I did was snorkel around the reef every day, making sure the instruments were still there. And then I'd sit back in the bar with a bar tab and watch the FIFA World Cup. And I also learned a lot about coral reef biology. One thing at the time, so I collected that data set really early on in my master's journey and about the first week of enrolment, because that's just the timeline of the project. But I was quite aware that having knowledge about that one particular reef in the middle of the Indian Ocean was kind of useful for that specific study. But if I was actually going to do something with, after that project, I had to learn some actual skills. So for me, I basically spent the subsequent 12 months of that project with 2 objectives. One was to learn how to process data really well and create information and stories out of data. Oh, cool. Sweet.
Yeah, I'm just sharing if you can see that now, so you can have your full slide set.
Cool. Thanks, Holly. So one important thing was learning. You can go back, Holly. Thank you. Learning how to process data. So it's one thing to collect information, but if you're not adding value to that and telling a story and learning something about the environment, what's the point? So I was quite conscious that I had to learn computer software. So for the main objective when I was studying was then to learn MATLAB and to learn how to take raw data and to create kind of a narrative out of that, not just kind of facts and figures, but communicate data in a way that tells a story and also unlock some of that hidden information about the environment. The other objective was to learn numerical modelling, so I wasn't just limited to what we were collecting as observations in the field, but then we could start taking that from the field onto the computer and then start saying, well, what if sea level rises, or what if we get the 1 in 100 year storm? What happens on the coast in those situations? So that curiosity from the field and the inspiration from spending time in the field, but then being able to reconstruct that on the computer. You pick along, Holly. One more. Some nice pretty pictures. Next one. So after my master's, there was an opportunity kind of to keep the momentum up, and I did a PhD with the same supervisor, Paul Kench, and I tapped into a project with SPC looking at wave transformation across low-lying atolls in Tuvalu. So Tuvalu coming up again tonight. So I got to travel over to Fiji and Tuvalu, work with the crew at SPC to deploy instruments and to take detailed measurements of the topography of the reefs. Nowadays, we're quite used to using fancy things like LiDAR surveys, and information just comes to us at the drop of a download. But even going back 10 years ago, we had to collect every drop of information ourselves if we wanted to know about the environment, the terrain, anything. We collected everything. So it's a way to, and I feel like in this new data-driven world, we're a little bit detached from the physical world that we give advice to. So especially now when you can get terrain information at the drop of a hat and model information and data, we're losing that connection to spending time outside, which really tells us what we need to know. And we're losing a little bit of that intuition for what actually happens, and getting curious and driving that hypothesis of what's happening and how the environment's changing. So I really, really value the time I've spent outside in the field with really knowledgeable people. So if you ever get a chance to go for a beach walk with John Duda, take it up. So the PhD process was pretty cool. We collected some good field data, but I was really interested in understanding what would happen in a future world with changing climate and rising sea level. So if we tick along, Holly. We wrote some interesting papers on the field data and then started developing some new expertise in how do we model these processes. So next slide. And then if you try to play the top animation, when I was able to write a piece of code to get the computer to do that, it was just like this kind of almost this hallelujah moment where I was like, I can kind of play God now and just put whatever I feel like into this model, and we kind of trust the physics. I was working with a French numerical oceanographer who just kind of speaks in differential equations. And then I thought, well, we could actually start answering some of these mythical questions about, well, what's going to happen with future sea level? How does the transmission of wave energy over a reef, we know that's functional at dissipating waves today, but in the future with rising sea levels, what's going to happen? So we started playing around with some of these questions in that numerical environment once we had some confidence. I think there's one more video you could quickly play. So we went from the conceptual of can we resolve accurately with a Boussinesq type model that nonlinear behavior of wave breaking on a reef, then can we drive a full time series of waves and generate all that nonlinear spectrum of wave breaking processes, dissipation, run-up processes. And then once we could do that confidently, we would get a bit carried away, changing the reef profile, changing sea level, and answering those hypothetical questions. So next slide. I stuck around at university for a while. I was quite happy there. Kind of in no rush to get a real job and have responsibilities and stuff. So I got offered a postdoc for 3 years, shared an office with Emma. She's still here. Yeah. So we were office buddies. Megan was doing her PhD at the time. So we were a little bit of a crew working on tropical coastlines. I helped set up a field lab in the Maldives. So I had to go there about 10 times and collect some baseline data around different islands and deploy instruments. We also took a field course over there. So 10 or 12 students a year, we would go and immersive experience of learning about the ecology of a reef, how islands form, physical process, stuff like that. We needed to justify doing this. So we set up some monitoring stations so we could measure the changes on the reef in different parts of the island, and generally had quite a good time. We also got to go travel around Indonesia and the Marshall Islands and other places like that, which gave me a pretty cool experience for what's happening around the tropical oceans. Next slide. And wrote a bunch of journal articles to justify the experience. So this is a neat little full circle moment for me. So this is me and Megan, both in the physical model, the Coast Lab flume over at Plymouth University. And we'd grown, or basically learnt the Messelink textbook is coastal geomorphology students all through undergrad, and then having the experience to go and collect data in the field and then run a bunch of hypothetical physical models looking at how reef islands change with sea level rise was pretty cool. And then we'd nerd out and try and replicate it all in a numerical model. So that consumed me for a few years. Next slide. And then I eventually had to grow up and get a real job. So I'd connected with Tom Shand, who I'm assuming some of you will know, during the course of my studies and in various forums, mostly at Beaches Surfing. So I reached out and eventually landed a job at TNT. And what struck me quite quickly was, as an academic, you're quite siloed, and the main deliverable at the end of a project is writing a journal article, and you're essentially competing with your own colleagues for finite funding and resources and attention. The first thing I noticed entering a consultancy was that sense of team, and we've got lucky enough over the course of the last 6 years, and this photo is going back a way, but the sense of team I've felt at TNT has just been quite remarkable. The support we have from seniors and from the new cohort of people coming up is just quite inspiring for me, actually. So we get to work on some pretty incredible projects. We take a great deal of pride and responsibility in what we do, but we also have a bit of fun when we can along the way. So I've got a little summary of a few of the highlight projects I've got to work on over the last couple of years. And each of them has their own little story, I guess. So on the left of the screen, there's the Opotiki Harbour entrance. So that's the first major port that's been built in New Zealand in over 100 years. And I kind of incidentally got involved, quite heavily involved in this, because I'd started at TNT in 2019 and kind of learnt the basics and did a few interesting jobs. And then when in lockdown, we kind of, at the start of 2020, there was those whisperings of, well, we're all going to lose our jobs and we're all going to die. So I had a bit of time not going out and doing stuff, and I wrote a list of things that I thought, well, I've been a consultant for 6 months now. There's a few things I think we can do a little bit better than what we're doing, and I'm just going to dedicate quite a bit of my own time to learning how to upskill myself so I could meet some of those potential improvements I thought that we could do. And one of them was in how we model waves for coastal engineering designs. So there were some specialist firms that can do this, but in-house skills at the time were a little bit limited. So I'd spent all my lockdown evenings and weekends learning new numerical models that were off the back of what I'd done in my PhD, but then bringing that into more industry standard software. And then basically just me playing. It's almost like, to me, it's like playing a computer game. I get a little bit obsessed and I get a little bit curious. So as soon as I find access to bathymetry, I just want to throw it in a wave model and see what happens. So I started doing this and sending some videos around to colleagues, and inevitably, when the opportunity then arose that we needed some coastal modelling expertise on these projects, that kind of landed on me because I was the one doing it for fun anyway. So then it took another year, basically a year of my life, to get something confident that we could go to the design engineers and say, this is how big the waves are going to be. And then they take that information and work out how much weight and volume all the armour units need to be, and all the various scour calculations, etc. Similar for the Te Aratapua shared path down in Wellington. So that was a great experience for me. It's an alliance, so that means we were working as the design engineer team, and I bring that kind of oceanography and physical process into it, and we created some really nifty numerical environments that complemented the physical modelling that was going on, so we could really, in an agile environment, create really kind of accurate information that could inform a moving design process and achieve those outcomes for getting a cost-effective solution within all the hundreds of constraints in that environment. Yeah, next one, Holly. But it's not just about coastal engineering. So one of the cool things, and I feel like the job I do day to day is there's a split between understanding coastal processes for kind of those coastal engineering projects, but also for how we manage the coast and the development at the coast. So I've been lucky enough to work on some pretty interesting coastal hazard projects. So the top one is that kind of is a bridge between that more engineering approach to coastal investigations and modelling that was looking at, there's a swimming pool complex in Newcastle and Sydney, or New South Wales, and they have real obvious issues with waves flooding their swimming complex, causing structural issues and also a risk to bathing and usability. So we came in and did a bunch of site investigations and measurements, and then replicated all that in a numerical environment, and we're able to come up with some parameters for designing resilience into the renewal, but also operational conditions for when they need to close that facility. Been able to bridge some of that academic background I've had into the day-to-day consulting projects, where we're now almost in a routine way applying some of those learnings from the how sea level rise will change processes in the islands, and not just change the energy at the shoreline, but change the morphology and shape and position. So we're developing models now almost at a research level that we're applying on consulting projects to understand how those landforms are going to change in the future, and giving advice to clients on what that means in terms of their assets and their risks to the community. Working on we've worked on the Auckland shoreline coastal hazards, was another curious one for me. There was a long program of work with TNT supporting Auckland Council and understanding the coastal erosion issues. We couldn't quite agree on the standard methods for understanding cliff hazards. So part of my job was to fix it. So we came up with a method that we'd applied on very small local sites. So it was quite a detailed approach to understand what was happening at, say, one neighbourhood scale. But then with my lockdown brain, I thought, well, if we can do it for one beach, why can't we do it everywhere? If we just think about the computing workflow and feeding in, developing the right software and algorithm to get the computer to do 90% of the work for us. So we developed that method in a way that we could automatically create elevation profiles at 20-metre intervals for the entire Auckland shoreline, run a bunch of calculations on the geometry of each slope, and then create an output in a shapefile that then drew a line on a map. So which ended up being a much more comprehensive method than what we'd originally done. And that was all basically me and lockdown with a bit of curiosity and how to not just deliver the same routine, but how do we scale it in a way that we can get the computer to do most of the job for us, but still maintain that QA and accuracy. Next slide. I think there's just two more. Hang in there. As a coastal geomorphologist, we get to work on some pretty interesting projects, and Matt's alluded to this as well. The Parkery sand mining was a pretty interesting one for me. It's the first time I've worked as an expert witness and appeared at the Environment Court giving evidence. I think that's a really, and Jen was there as well. So it's a really, I think it's quite a rewarding, and it's a great deal of responsibility as well to understand that environment in a way that, and as a coastal expert, the job isn't to have an opinion, but it's about to unlocking those bits of puzzle around the environment. So we don't know everything about the coastal environment. Everything's moving, everything's in flux. The sand's moving day to day, the sea level's changing, waves come and go. We can create little bits of knowledge from the data points that we have. We can do clever things and we can write models, we can do analysis of data, but there's always going to be gaps in that knowledge. So our job is to piece together that puzzle board and create a picture of the environment that then we can communicate back to the decision makers. So for me, working through that process was really interesting. And you get, you're creating information, you're getting cross-examined by lawyers about whether you're right or wrong. but ultimately it's having that responsibility for giving the decision makers the information they need to make an informed decision about something that could have a consequence on the environment. So I found that a really good test, but it was also a good experience. Next one. And it's just a few other examples of coastal process projects we've been able to work on to try and understand the impacts of infrastructure projects along the coast. So a lot of the work, and I think a lot of the big challenge that we're facing in the coastal engineering and management is how do we create coastal environments that are functional today but resilient into the future, and that adaptation space is I think where a lot of projects end up working in. So I've been lucky enough to work on projects across New Zealand and the Pacific where we're tapping into that knowledge of coastal processes and the interplay between not just the natural coastal environment, but how humans feed into that, and trying to give advice, working with communities and councils and various developers and stakeholders about how we can do that in a way that is building resilience, but it's also building functional and thriving communities. So it's an important job, and something that requires piecing together those little mystery bits of information to telling a story and giving good advice is what it's all about, really. And I think there's one last slide of my fleeting thoughts I had when I was preparing these slides on Monday. I guess it's really, I'm one of those, you sometimes hear advice saying, don't go into a profession that you're passionate about. Well, that's definitely not me. I feel like for me it works because I get so much inspiration. I probably get an unreasonable amount of inspiration when I go on a daily beach walk. Like I walked down Orewa Beach on the weekend and just found, watching the construction of the seawall that I'd read about in the news for the last 20-ish years, I found it amazing. I walk down my local beach at Milford most days and I'm still amazed that the sand in front of the seawall can completely disappear in one storm and be back burying that seawall again 2 weeks later. So it's important to stay passionate and stay inspired, and the way that you do that might change over your career. I recently started wingfoiling, and for me that's been an amazing experience because now I'm out on windy days where I'd normally just be at home avoiding the beach, and learning how to read an evolving sea state has been a really inspiring way for me to reconnect with that environment. So for me, it's about spending time outside, especially in the age of big data and AI. Hopefully that just means the computer can tune away and we can spend time walking along the beach and observing how things are actually behaving. One of the things I've noticed with the different people I've worked with over the years is that curiosity can be a really good thing, but it needs a few boundaries. So I think that's something I've learned maybe the hard way, is you can be curious, but you need to pair that with the right direction. Otherwise you just spin in circles. So I've been lucky enough to have some amazing mentors that can channel my curiosity into the right direction. So I'm not just spinning the wheels. And working in a team, I think, you get a good team is way more valuable than a bunch of individuals that don't get along. So that's all. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Eddie, either online or in person? Oh, yes, we've got one.
Oh, I just go to the beach.
Oh, yeah. Not to have feeling maybe we need to have
Good question.
Can
I
you,
guess-
can you sort of repeat the question you
Oh,
asked
yeah.
there?
So the question was about Tuvalu and some recent news. It wasn't about, I don't think there's an evacuation, but so Tuvalu have made a deal with Australia that there's a certain number of people can move and become citizens of Australia each year. And they had about a third of the country applied in the first round. That's not the only adaptation response they've taken on though. So they're also reclaiming and building up land in Funafuti and Whangawhale, their main developed area. And they've definitely got plans and ambition to build resilience and maintain a population living in the country. So there's a lot of engineering work and adaptation work going on in country as well.
Thank you. Anybody else online or in person? Otherwise, I just wanted everyone to join me in thanking our 4 speakers. Yeah, it's been amazing learning about your coastal journey. So thank you very much. We do have a few more slides to show. I don't know if that's. Oh, okay, we have to go to the end. Yep. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming, and you're welcome to stay and you eat the food and drink some more wine or beer or fruit juice. Also, just wanted to kind of let you know about the next event, which is another Coastal Careers series, which is going to be in Christchurch.
Megan,
Yes.
sorry, could you just reshare the screen from the laptop?
Okay. How do I do that?
Do we do that?
Off your laptop, maybe.
Got it.
Got it. Okay, we've got it. Does that work?
Perfect. Yep, that's come through.
Yes, so the next event is in Christchurch in October the 30th. It will also have an online option as well. So anyone obviously who's living in Auckland and can't make it down there, then you could be able to come online. And while you're all kind of mingling and having a little bit more food and something to drink, if you wouldn't mind helping us out by giving us a little bit of feedback on what sort of events you'd like next year. So these are the 2 events we're going to run this year, the coastal kind of career, learning about the different kind of careers that people have in coastal science or engineering, which we thought was something that was quite relevant to today. But next year we're looking for different options. So if you use the QR code or go to, I had to use something different than the Mentimeter because it doesn't have enough people. So I've tried something new, so hopefully it works. But yeah, if you use the QR code, it'll come up saying something about not being open yet, but then you should be able to come on and some questions will come up. So is this going to work if I put on the, did you log out? Okay, let me just see if this works. Is that, oh no, it's not coming up on there, okay. We'll just hold on a second while I work this out, but feel free to have some food and whatnot. I saved my password, so. Oh. Okay. I saved my password for you, but I don't know if it's going to type it on here. Yeah, it's on here. Oh. Eddie.
Hey, I wonder if it's just off to the side. like extended, not duplicating.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I've managed to put the poll up. So if you do have time just to have a look and go on to wooclap.com and put the code in, then you can vote and let us know what sort of thing you might be interested in next year. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at the next event.
Nice work.
Well done, Eddie.
Thanks, John.
That was one comment.
Oh, that's
I love it. John.
I just university for 10 years and then consulting for 6.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? All the inspiration he gets from going. I go to the beach and I'm like, oh, it's a nice wave, or I'm looking at the beach, or looking at shelf.